Thank you. I think this is a way of following up on Steve's question, maybe slightly different terms. One thing that seems to tie Dewey and Wittgenstein together is that they are both skeptical about a certain kind of philosophical question. And I don't want to go as far as say they're anti-philosophical, but they seem to think that there's some questions where it'd be a misapplication of philosophical energies to try to answer these questions philosophically. And so I have a question about the three questions that you raised, too, the demarcation, emergence, and language question. Because looking at those, it seems that 2.5 of them at least could very well be answered by appealing to science, or at least partly by appealing to science. We want to know what the social scientists would have to say, the linguists, the developmental psychologists, and so on down the line. I guess I'm curious what your response would be to about that. Well, these aren't necessarily philosophical questions, and if we treat them as philosophical questions, then we run the risk of going down a blind alley out of which we may never emerge.
Okay, I think to begin with, it's important to distinguish the grounds that Dewey and Wittgenstein have for their hostility to some of the same sets of questions, which each of them would have been happy to call metaphysical questions. For Wittgenstein, it's because of the ground commitment that he has that's expressed in the only sentence that appears verbatim both in the Tractatus and in the Investigations: philosophy is not one of the natural sciences. And he thinks that adopting a theoretical method of postulation, of theorizing, of generalizing, all of those activities are characteristic of the natural sciences, and engaging in those would be assimilating philosophy to the natural sciences. So that's the source of his hostility to this. Dewey, on the other hand, is perfectly happy to assimilate philosophical thinking to scientific thinking. There are specific differences, there are differences of generality, but where problems can be turned into or given an empirical shape where they can be addressed by scientific method, he's all in favor of that. And in Experience in Nature, he says, if our science advanced far enough, we wouldn't even have to talk about experience, because everything I'm talking about as experience, would be a subject of scientific investigation closer to the ground. This is just a necessary form of generalization at this point before we have these specific treatments of them. So Wittgenstein and Dewey would be approaching the question, well, are these, suppose the emergence, demarcation, and leverage question turned out just to be empirical questions, would that mean they were bad philosophical questions? They're going to have diametrically opposed answers to those. So we really need to keep two sets of books on them. Now, I think that certainly the emergence and the leverage question need to be informed by all sorts of empirical investigation. The sort of work that Mike Tomasello does on how we move ontogenetically and phylogenetically into language-like practices. These are absolutely crucial. There is nobody that Dewey would have been happier to read than Tomasello on these points about the emergence question. And we've learned a lot, I think, about the leverage question, about what sorts of features of discursive practice it is that underlie sort of the higher cultural achievements that we have, and in particular, being able to understand things scientifically, not just in natural science, in social science, and so on. It's not clear to me that the linking together of them that the demarcation question does is similarly sort of empirically addressable. It seems to me that's a characteristically philosophical question about how we understand the relation between these sort of empirical facts about what you can get from non-discursive practices by redeploying them, and what you can get once you've got some linguistic practices about sort of building on them, the primatologist and child developmental person, and then the sociologist and organizational specialist, getting those together, that seems to me that is the kind of philosophical question about what distinguishes us as discursive beings that I started off the talk by admiring Kant for making this revolutionary philosophical move to think of us as distinguished from merely natural creatures, not by the presence or absence of some ontological stuff, but by our being subject to distinctive kinds of normative assessment, moving from the ontology to deontology. That, it seems to me, that's a paradigmatic philosophical move. And I'm talking about little epicycles on that move way downstream. We are the small men, the last men, you know.